Speaking of men, the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw said that a reasonable man adapts himself to the world, whereas the unreasonable man persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. We live under the constant pressure to be reasonable. Your girlfriend, your wife, your boss, your culture, the television programs that you watch, the books that you read, they all have an opinion on the kind of man you're supposed to be. And it's incumbent upon you to be reasonable and to fit in with their expectations of the way you're supposed to live. It's incumbent upon you to adapt yourself to fit in with their version of your life. And the purpose of this morning's talk is to give you permission, not that you need it, but to give it to you nonetheless, to be unreasonable. To give you permission to define your environment rather than be defined by it. To shape rather than be shaped. To be driven above all by your own values, your own purposes, your own agendas, rather than the purposes, values and agendas of others. To critically analyse your situation and see it for what it might be, for what you would wish it to be, rather than simply accept it for what it already is. And I lay all of that on the table for you, because as we carry on looking into the detail of the Christmas story, it will become immediately apparent that the hero of this morning's episode, Joseph, is a man who is reasonably expected to act in a certain way. And in the face of those reasonable expectations, he acts unreasonably. And in the face of his unreasonableness, I find an attractive template for manhood in particular, and for personhood in general, in fact for life itself. In the Gospel according to St. Matthew, we read that this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. Now, the key word in this sentence is the word pledged. In the ancient world, as you perhaps know, people were not free to choose for themselves whom they would date. That choice was always made for them by their parents when they were very, very young. So the main protagonists in the Christmas story, Mary and Joseph, at no point in their lives chose one another. That choice was made for them when they were children by their respective parents. And parents, being that little bit older and that little bit wiser, always approached the business of matchmaking with a practical rather than a romantic criteria. So when Mary's parents were pairing off their precious little girl with Joseph, they wouldn't have asked any of the questions that you might ask when you were choosing a partner for yourself. Is he attractive? Does he have good personal hygiene? Does he shave his nostrils? Does he pick up his socks? Does he have a good sense of humour? Is he a Sagittarius? These issues were non-issues to Mary's parents. The only thing that Mary's parents are thinking of as they're considering potential mates for their daughter is this young man the kind of person who's going to grow up and be able to provide a good life financially for our little girl? Will Joseph be able to provide for our daughter? And I suppose that's an entirely reasonable question to ask. After all, if you want to see an attractive man, you can always look at a fashion catalogue, but at the end of the day, someone's always got to pay the rent. And in the ancient world, it's all about paying the rent. Women, remember, were excluded from large sections of the economy, so they needed a man to step up and provide for them. And so for that reason, most girls in antiquity were paired off with men who tended to be 4 or 5 years older than they were, and I'll explain why in a moment. So, in this sentence, what we're being told is that Mary is pledged to be married to Joseph. Joseph is pledged to be married to Mary. This pledging, getting together thing happened in 3 distinct stages. Let me explain those to you. Stage number 1 is the arrangement. At this stage, the girl would have been about 7 years old, and the boy would have been about 12, 13 years old. Their parents got together, had some tea and cake, and arranged that when their children were of a sufficient age, they would become husband and wife. So when Mary and Joseph's parents arrange their wedding, Mary is about a 7-year-old girl, Joseph is about a 12, 13-year-old boy. Stage 2 is the betrothal or the engagement party, something like that. At this stage, the girl would have been about 12, 13 years old. The boy would have been about 17, 18 years old. At this stage, the couple are then allowed to date. They never have one-on-one time, which I approve of as a father. So it's a heavily regulated sort of convention, always chaperones and so on and so forth. And then stage 3, about a year after the betrothal ceremony, is what they call the hoopla. This is the actual wedding, after which they live together as husband and wife in the same house and do all the things husbands and wives do, like argue and not talk to one another and so on. So, here's the thing, listen carefully. When at stage 1 of this process, Mary's parents go into her bedroom and inform her that they've just arranged her forthcoming marriage, Mary, as a 7-year-old girl, looks up from whatever she's doing and says, "Oh, that's nice," and goes straight back to playing with her Barbies. She's 7, she's a girl, that's her world. In Joseph's home, however, totally different response. When Joseph's parents go into his bedroom and tell him as a 12, 13-year-old young man in his culture that they've just arranged his forthcoming marriage, he as a young man immediately begins to feel the pressure. He as a young man immediately begins to have thoughts in his head that say things like, "I better go out and start working harder. I better start saving more money. I better start getting my house together for my wife and my kids. I better start laying bricks and hanging drywall and all that stuff. I got to get ready because the clock's ticking. In 5 years, this little girl's going to expect a home and money and stuff and Tupperware and things." 12 years old, Joseph feels this pressure the second his parents do the deal. And I mention that to you because I want you to understand that by the time Joseph is in his late teens and he turns up for his formal betrothal engagement party, he's already been slaving his guts out for 5 years. He's not dated this girl yet, probably not had a conversation with her. But for 5 long years, he's been doing 6-hour days, 12-hour shifts, working his fingers to the bone, hanging drywall, laying marble countertops, getting his life and his house ready for his soon-to-be bride. That's what's reasonably expected of him, and that's what we assume, has been so busy doing. So at this point in the story, we are at stage 2. Joseph is pledged, he's betrothed to be married to Mary. This means he is in a legally binding relationship with this girl that is identical to a marriage in but 2 regards. They don't yet live together and they don't yet sleep together. In all other respects, this is legal. If one of them dies, the other becomes a widow/widower. If one of them wants out of the arrangement, a legal divorce is required. Now, so far, so good then. So far, we feel good about everyone. I do. I'm all right with this. In verse 18, you have 2 young people doing what's expected of them in their culture. They are respecting their parents' choice. That is appropriate. I like that. Mary, we assume, is doing whatever young girls do, and I'm okay with that. And Joseph particularly, him I like, because he's a man. He's working hard, he's saving, he's building, he's constructing, he's making a life for himself and his future wife. Good guy. I like him. So far, so good. At this point, we are to imagine Joseph putting the finishing touches to the house. Like the marble's done, we're on the backsplash now. Right, the things you've been asking for 20 years, he's doing them. Right, good guy. Then at the end of verse 18, we read that a problem, quite literally, is developing. Matthew says that before they came together, that is, before stage 3, before their formal wedding ceremony, after which they might then live together in the same house and be together, before all that, have you got the word before? Joseph discovers that this person, whom he's been slaving his guts out for the last 5 years, pulling 6-hour weeks, 12-hour days, working his fingers to the bone, he discovers that this person is pregnant and it's not his. Now, when we read the words of verse 18, we read them, of course, with the benefit of 2,000 years of Christian history, and indeed, as students of the Bible, we read them with the benefit of commentary. So for us, it's not just that Mary is pregnant, it's that Mary is pregnant, and then Matthew tells us through the Holy Spirit. Joseph doesn't read these words, nor does he at this point have the benefit of commentary. All he sees is a bump that shouldn't be there. Right? So this is a tough moment. Tough moment. Seeing a bump that should not be there. Coming home early from work and hearing noises from the bedroom that should not be there. Looking through your spouse's pockets and finding a letter that should not be there. Examining your credit card bill and finding a motel receipt that should not be there. This is a tough, tough moment. And if you and I go through a tough moment like that moment we discover something about our loved one we really didn't want to discover, our culture gives us a great degree of latitude in our response, ranging from shrugging our shoulders at one extreme to murder on the other. Maybe not murder, or, well, okay, seriously. If we discover that in our marriages and in our relationships, we can legitimately respond almost any way we want to. So, for example, we might say, that's it, we're done. Relationship over, pack your bags, you're gone. And if we make that decision, no one will call us a bad scholar, no one will think the less of us. That's a fair response in our culture. Or we might say, you know what, this hurts, but, you know, I get it, and let's work this out. Let's work this out. Let's fight through this. We'll go to counselling, we'll do whatever, we'll work it out, and we'll stick together, and we'll make a go of it. For the sake of the marriage, for the sake of the kids, we'll make this work. And that also is a fair response. If we went down that road, no one, hopefully, would call us a bad scholar for doing so. But however we choose to respond to this sort of a discovery, what's great about our culture is that we are free to respond any way we like. There is simply no right and wrong response to this issue. Joseph, however, in his first century small town culture, has zero latitude in his response. He has no one advising him to give Mary a second chance. Far from it. The second his family and friends hear or see about Mary's bump, they are saying to him with one voice, you must divorce this woman quickly. And if you don't, your reputation will be finished. Now, in our culture, the whole business of reputation isn't as important as it once was. In fact, it's almost not important anymore. As society urbanizes and becomes increasingly impersonal, we care less about what people think of us. After all, why should we care what our neighbours think about us when we don't even know who our neighbours are? 50 years ago, if someone in our neighbourhood had an affair, everyone would be talking about it for weeks. Because everyone knew everyone else's business and everyone cared about everyone else's business. Today, if someone in our neighbourhood has an affair, the chances are we won't even know who they are, much less care. This is a strictly modern urban phenomenon. The societies of the ancient world were interconnected, and the smaller the village, the more interconnected they were. Everyone knew everyone's business. I'm closely connected with a small island on the west coast of Scotland, and there's a guy there, he is a genealogist. And if your ancestors came from that island, you could go to him and tell him your name and the village, and he could tell you things about your family that in some cases you'd rather not know. Like, there's this instant knowledge of who you are, what you're about, what your family is, what the stories are, what skeletons there are in the closet. This is Joseph's village. And in these small villages, reputation is everything. Face is everything. And in these small communities, the worst thing that can happen to you as a man is for you to lose respect, for you to lose face among your neighbours and your colleagues and friends. So get this. In this culture, if your wife cheated on you, that made you as a man lose respect. The moment that everyone in Joseph's community see Mary's bump or hears about it, which would have happened almost instantaneously in the village, this is the moment that Joseph loses respect as a man. To his face and behind his back, people would have laughed at him. They would have said, look at that idiot, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for her. What an idiot. Going broke to buy a marble countertop while she's in a motel with some other guy. What an idiot. What an idiot. He just threw away 5 years of his life for her. It's embarrassing. And the only way that Joseph in his culture can extract himself from this embarrassment is by divorcing Mary. In fact, I phrased that sentence as though it was optional. It wasn't. He is legally required to divorce her. Both Roman law and Jewish law, which are both operative in this village in this time, presume two things. If Joseph doesn't divorce Mary, the law presumes A, that the child must be his, which causes all sorts of problems in his culture, or it presumes B, that Joseph has been pimping his young wife out to pay for the marble countertops. Serious. Which again causes all sorts of problems for him in his village. Furthermore, if Joseph fails to divorce Mary, he is sending a message to his entire community that he's not a real man. That he's willing to take it. And take it. That's the kind of guy he is. He acts tough when he's building his home, but he's not a real man. He'll take it, and he'll take it, and he'll keep taking it. He's the kind of guy you can take advantage of. That's the message if he doesn't divorce this woman. So in this moment, Joseph's culture, his educational background, his religion, his family, his friends, his own internal voice are speaking to him, and their advice is unequivocal and it is clear. You got to divorce this woman, and you got to do so brutally. You got to send a message that says you will not take this. You will not be used and abused. And so the pressure on him, if it can be called that, is for him to just fit in with this expectation. To do the right thing. To be reasonable. Be reasonable. Do what's expected. You've got your whole life to think about. Next sentence. We're told, because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. You can't tell because of the way that sentence is written in English, so you'll have to take my word for it. There is in Greek a considerable tension between these two clauses. Clause 1, Joseph is a righteous man. Clause 2, he didn't want to expose her to public disgrace. In English, it looks like one follows from the other, but it's not that way. There is tension here. There is internal debate. When it says that Joseph is righteous, it doesn't mean righteous as in he kind of cares how she feels, necessarily. It means righteous as in, this is a guy who always does what's right morally. A guy who always does what's right according to his religion. A guy who is serious about obeying the rules. Here's Joseph's reputation in the village. When the rabbi says something, Joseph does it. When the rules of his culture or the customs of his village dictate a certain course of action, Joseph always complies. When something's expected of him, Joseph always fits in. He does what's right always. And that side of him is held in tension with, he didn't want to expose her. He's thinking here that he can't do what's right. What's right is to be brutal. What's right, from the point of view of his culture and his friends and his religion, is that he should terminate this relationship as publicly and as messily as possible. Because the only way he can gain face again, the only way he can regain respect, is by dragging her through the divorce courts and by getting his hands on the one thing that divorces are always all about at the end of the day.
Money.
Money. House, money, assets, pension. It's always been about that. Still is. Was then. If Joseph does what's right, if he does what's expected of him, if he does the reasonable thing, he stands to gain financially. Let me explain. At stage 2 of the process, the betrothal, the engagement ceremony, 2 separate financial transactions would have taken place, and they were both sizable. First of all, Mary's father would have given to her a dowry. This would have been either a sum of money or an expensive heirloom, stocks and bonds, something like that, that she can take into her forthcoming marriage as an insurance policy. You know, things go wrong in life. Husbands die. People get sick. People fall on hard times. Husbands get rid of wives for someone, better. It was very easy in the ancient world to do this. And women had almost no legal rights, and it was very difficult for them to survive financially in a male-dominated economy. So, to guard against this, fathers would give their daughters a bung, basically, and they would say to them, stick this under your pillow, bury it under a rock, and keep this for a rainy day. Don't buy a flat-screen TV or whatever, just keep this in case things go wrong, because you never know. So that was the dowry. The second financial transaction that would have taken place at the night of the engagement party was called the mohar. This was a sum of money that Joseph, as a man, paid to Mary's father. This I like, as the father of a daughter. So the thinking was, in the ancient world, you know what, I've got a daughter, and she is my most precious possession. Like, she is so special to me. And you think you're going to marry her for free? Oh, no. Money. I need, that sounds slightly creepy, doesn't it? No, I'm still okay with it. That was just the culture. The guy, as a sign of respect, as a sign of, I recognize the worth of this girl, would always give a large sum of money to the father. And this was another reason why guys tended to be older. They had to save up for this. 5 years. In our day it's an engagement ring, then it was a mohar. Now in Joseph's culture, women had almost no legal rights anyway. But in a divorce situation like this, they had zero legal rights. And as a means of saving face in his community, as a means of righting the wrong that's been done, as a means of getting payback for the last 5 years of working hard for nothing, of building a house for this, he is well within his legal rights to say, I am now taking possession of the dowry, that's mine. And then he would go to the father-in-law and say, I am suing you, I want the mohar back. And the thinking was this, I bought faulty goods. I want my money back. This thing you told me, it doesn't do what it said on the can. I want it back. So Joseph, not only does he have all sorts of emotional and religious and cultural reasons to shame Mary, he also has financial reasons. And they're all tied up. This is his reasonable course of action. Joseph, however, chooses to be unreasonable. We read instead that he chooses to divorce her quietly. So in his mind, there will be no public embarrassment. There will be no lawyers. How about that? There will be no judges. There will be no filling in of forms. There will be no screwing his ex-wife over for every single penny he can get. None of that. No arguing about money at all, it seems. I guess he knows that Mary's family and her future are going to need every penny she can get. And just because this kid isn't his, doesn't mean he's going to consign her or the child to a life of destitution. So at this point I feel quite good about Joseph still. Rather than fighting over every last penny and fighting over every trivial detail, his attitude seems to be, you know what, I'm a man. I'm a real man. So I can start over. I still got my 2 hands, my 2 feet, still got my brain, still got my ingenuity. I can still do stuff, I can still make it. My future will be all right. Yours, not so much. So you're going to need this. You're going to need every penny. I can start again, you can't. So he lets her keep it. Good man. Then in verse 20, everything changes. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. And then straight away, notice the connection in Joseph's mind. This is the guy he is. He hears, he obeys. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded and took Mary home as his wife. Now, that's sweet. Happy ever after, right? Absolutely not. Easy words to read. He took Mary home as his wife. But these were not easy words to live, because nothing changed. Joseph still lived in a small village, still lived among people who knew all his business. And for the rest of his life, Joseph would have lived with the ridicule and the embarrassment of Mary and Jesus. There would have been jokes, there would have been knowing glances, subtle laughs. So here's the template for manhood and personhood that I read in this story. Joseph lived within a clearly defined framework. His actions as a man were predetermined by his culture, by his family, by his friends. The reasonable thing for him to do would have been to follow that predetermined path and do what was expected of him. But because he felt differently, both internally and in his prayers, he chose to be unreasonable. He chose not to do what was expected, not to do what was right, and instead follow the path of his own inner convictions. And I think that all too often in life we end up either morally or professionally or socially or spiritually living within frameworks that aren't our own. And I think it's reasonable, in the attempt to craft some life that is truly our own, to be unreasonable every now and again. I think it's reasonable to say, I won't behave the way you expect me to behave. I'll behave the way I believe. I think it's reasonable to say, I won't do the career that you want me to do. I'll follow my own path and make my own life. I won't put up with this because you think I should. I'll act the way I think is right and proper. I won't live under your pressure. I instead will live under the pressure of my own inner convictions and beliefs and faith. Be careful, the story of Joseph reminds us, how much you care about the opinions of other people. Because if you care too much about their opinions, before long, those opinions will run your life, and they should not. That place belongs solely to your own convictions and faith. Any questions? I think that would be best. John the Baptist's wife, was John the Baptist married? Oh, his mother. Oh, John the Baptist's mother. Okay. Good question. Are we vaguely aware of who John the Baptist was?
No.
Okay, so just before this happens in the Nativity story, a similar situation happens in the life of some of Jesus' relatives who end up having this child, John the Baptist, who has this role in the Bible. He's kind of like a weird prophet who sets the scene for Jesus' arrival. And the question is, how would John the Baptist's mother have felt? How would his parents have felt about what happened in John the Baptist's life? John the Baptist, for those of you who don't know, at the early part of his career, wildly popular, pulling in big numbers. At the end of his career, he ends up getting his head cut off because of a lap dancer, basically. So, she was. So we don't know is the answer. What we do know is that at the early part of John's life, there is this element of shame involved. And you see it in the Jesus story too. In that the parents don't get to choose the kid's name. Now for a woman, no big deal in the ancient world. But for a man, he has to have the family name. He has to have the family name. How would you feel, maybe some of you experienced this, if your kid chose to change his or her name? Not just the first one, but the family name. This would be a big deal. Big deal in Italian culture. Huge deal in a Scottish culture. You don't want my name anymore? You see this in the early nativity stories, both in Jesus and John the Baptist. They don't get to choose the name. So already there's this business of the good news is an imposition on me. The announcement of my salvation is to a degree disturbing. It is unsettling. And moving from the nativity story and into our lives, we experience this with the gospel all the time. It's great news, it's forgiveness, it's blessing, it's freedom, it's a brand new start in life. It's all things that belong in the positive end of the spectrum, absolutely. But there's change. There's owning wrong. There's accepting guilt. There's a willingness to say, This I will not do anymore. And all of that goodness and unpleasantness, positive change and negative imposition is there in the Nativity, in the simple details of how you respond to this announcement. Good question. I was talking with a person before church actually about health and about gym. I think they were asking my advice, to be honest. And the comment was made, I know I should go to the gym, but sometimes I don't feel like it. That, in a different context, is our Christian faith sometimes. I know I should, but sometimes it's difficult. I know this is awesome, really awesome, and it's going to make a huge difference, but sometimes it's difficult. So in the Bible, the titles are Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. In his own village, he would have been called Jesus, son of Joseph. And you just know the son of Joseph bit would sometimes have been said with a little bit of sarcasm.
So really there is no last name?
The culture is different. So the last names are son of. My own name, Darren, do you know what my last name is? McLean, right? Well, the word McLean means son of Ghislaine, right? So this is how it was in the ancient world. So Jesus, son of Joseph, son of somebody, son of somebody, son of somebody. And this in a small village is a way of knowing who you are.
So many last names.
It's less about a name and more about, now I know who you are. I know who your family are. I know who your cousins are. I know where you fit into the tree going back to the beginning. That was how they thought. And they thought that if I know your name and if I know your family and if I know everything about you, then I know who you are. And this is part of the reason, I think, in the Gospels why Jesus is so disrespected in his home village. Remember, Jesus at the start of his career, he's like number one bestseller, pulling in big crowds. Everywhere he goes, people go nuts. And then there's this episode, he goes back to his own village, and he goes down like a lead balloon. He has his first big failure in his hometown. Why? It's due in part to the embarrassing detail of the gospel story. You're coming here and standing in our synagogue reading a story. Sure. You're Jesus, son of Joseph. Sure. Sure you are. And now you're preaching to us? I don't think so. You're the Messiah? I don't think so. Good question. We're out of time, folks. Thanks for coming. God bless you. See you next Sunday.